We're now going to be talking about percentages because really a fraction, if we think about it in these terms, a fraction just means a percentage of something, right? And we're going to do a couple of demonstrations today, but if we kind of go back to the classic, pi example, okay? So we divide this up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces, right? So we can, as a fraction, if I were to only be talking about this one piece of the pie, right? I could refer to that as 1/8 or 1 of 8 pieces, right? But there's also we can talk about that portion as a percentage. A certain percent of the pie has been taken or eaten or whatever you want to say, right? So we can now express this rate, this fraction, as a percent, and that's actually really important for us, whether we're in construction, whether we're in machining, or welding. It doesn't matter. Being able to convert fractions into percentages is something we're going to be doing nearly every single day in our trade. So what we want to know is, how do we do this? How do we convert a common fraction into a percentage? How do we convert a decimal fraction into a percentage? And how do we convert a percentage back into whether it's a common fraction or a decimal fraction? Basically, what I want to go through here with you guys is the a more concise understanding of how percentages work. So take, for instance, this diagram here. Okay, so we've got this whole or large green square that you see highlighted here. This is the whole unit, okay? This is the whole part. And you can see that I've divided it up into 100 smaller squares, and I highlighted one of them there for you. So we could say that the large square, it contains all 100% of the small squares. So what we need to understand then when it comes to percentages is the value of each one of the small squares. So, very quickly, this is a very simple demonstration, but here we can recognize quickly that each small square is one part of the 100 parts. Okay, 1 of 100. 1 over 100, right? 1 divided by 100. And we've also seen this as a ratio, right? 1 to 100. So try and think about this as scale even. So if you look at that red box, it is 1/100th the size of the entire box. That's really what we're saying. It's 1/100th. 1 over 100, okay? Or 1 of 100 pieces. Okay, so that's nice and clear, nice and easy to understand, because not all percentages are so basic and so easy. Not everything is an amount out of 100. But let's start with this. So if the large square here, people, is 100% of the small squares, how much is one of the small squares, right? So we know that 1/100th, or one of these squares, is equal to 1%. I mean, that only makes sense, right? And if you think about it as just numbers, if we counted each square starting with 1, we'd get to 100 by the time we get from this square here, and we count each square in each row. By the time we get down here, we're at 100 or 100%. Okay. All right. So 100% is the whole. So 100% has got to be equal to 1, okay, or one whole piece. And so if you think about, maybe, for instance, if you get a test, right, or an assignment, and it's marked out of 72. 72 is the whole, right? It's the total available number of marks. And whatever mark you get out of 72, it's a fraction, right? And so it doesn't matter what the numerator and the denominator are. What matters is that we understand that 100% of it will be the total number available, no matter how many units we've broken it into, okay? So if 1 square is equal to 1/100th of the whole, then each square is equal to 1 divided by 100, and that equals 0.01. So this is important for us. 0.01, look at that number, guys. Okay, look at that number. 0.01, that means 1%. Okay, that's what 0.01 means. So when you see 0.01, when we're talking about percentage, that's 1%. Okay, a 1/100th of the whole is equal to 1% of 100%. So now let's look at a different example here. All right. So the large square, again, is the 100%. It's the whole amount. So what percentage of this large square is shaded? So here we've got this square. It's divided into 4 pieces, and 3 of these pieces are shaded, right? So therefore, 3 of the 4 squares are shaded. So what we want to do is we want to just write it as a fraction. And we're keeping it simple at the beginning because really percentages are very, very basic, okay? So we write this as a fraction. There are 4 available, right? There are 4 available pieces. So this is the total available number, and this is how many we're talking about, right? So 3 of 4. So really, that means what? 3 divided by 4, 75, 0.75, right? 0.75. So 0.75 is 75%. And we don't need to be a math genius to understand this. If we look at this picture, right, we can see very clearly that 75% of this is shaded. But how do we figure out percentages when it comes to numbers that don't have an equal number of pieces that are the whole? So look at this example here. Here we've got 7 equal pieces, okay? Pieces that are equal in size, I guess. And this represents 100%, or the total amount of available pieces. So what percentage of the whole is the shaded part? So we have 3 of 7 squares are shaded. So it's 3 divided by 7, right? 3 of 7. Well, what's the percentage? Well, as we've learned, when it comes to percentages, we simply divide 3 divided by 7, and we get a decimal, right? Remember what we learned a few slides ago, that 0.01 is 1%. 0.10 is 10%. So if 0.10 is 10%, then 0.40 is 40%. And then the 3 is, it falls in the ones column, right? So we have 0.43 or 43%. So right away, what you can tell is when we get into percentages, if you look at any decimal number, whether it's decimal 5, decimal 67, decimal 23, whatever wherever the decimal is, the numbers following it immediately are is the percentage, right? So in this case, it's 43%. If it said 0.82, it'd be 82%. 0.04 would be 4%, right? So if 0.01 is equal to 1%, 0.05 equals 5%, 0.1 is 10%, 0.55 is 55%, and 0.99 is 99%, right? So very easy to understand. But, you know, another way that we can look at percentage is by simply understanding how to move the decimal in the fraction. So we learn different ways, right? So if 1 over 100 is equal to 0.01 over 1, which we know it is, right? We already learned that. Remember, we just learned that 1% is equal to 0.01, right? So that means that the 100 has to be equal to 1. This is the whole. So it's one whole number, right? But what we can do if we're trying to figure out percentage by just looking at the fraction, look at where the decimal is. If it's 1 of 100, it's 0.01 of 1. We can simply just move the decimal. In this case, if we look, we take the decimal place, move it one position, and now we get this fraction. If we move it only one decimal, so the numerator, we move the decimal one place, denominator, we move it one place, and now it looks like this. 0.1 over 10, right? And if we go one more time, if we move the decimal that second place, we get 1 point over 100 point. This just means where the decimal is placed. But look at what we started with. 1/100th is equal to 1 over 100, right? So if you, very quickly, if you can remember that whatever this number is here, whatever the percentage is here, it's based off of where the decimal is, right? So if you can remember 1% is read as 0.01, then you can very quickly figure out what the value or what the percentage of this number is. So 1/100th, you can quickly find out that that's 1% of 100%. Let's look at another example here for a sec. So what about 0.025? What would this equal as a percent? So what we can do is we can take this 0.025 and write it over a 1. So in our last slide, we took a single number, we took 1 and wrote it over 100, right? And we understand that's 1%. But now we have a 0.025. Well, how do we know what this is as a percent? Well, it's the same as before, right? If you take that decimal and you move it 0.25 over 10, right? Because here it's 0.025 written over 1. We move the decimal one place, we move it one place here. This should say 0.25 over 10. And then if we move it one more place, so it's 2.5 over 100. Well, we know that we're trying to figure out percentages, right? So now we're at 100%. So what is the value of 2.5, right? So the 2.5 is 2.5%. Let's do this with a second example. If we take 0.375 and we want to learn what this is as a percent. So we can go through the motions again, right? We can take the 0.375, we can write it over top of the 1. If we move the decimal one place to 3.75, it should be written over a 10. If we move it a second time, it's 37.5 written over 100. So what we learn here is that 0.375 is equal to 37.5%. Well, this is how it works, but if we just simply go up to the decimal, right, our decimal fraction, and move the decimal 2 places to the right, we get the percentage, 37.5%. Let's try expressing percentage as a common fraction. So what is 37.5 as a common fraction? So the nice thing about this is we need to get rid of the decimal, right? So we take the 37.5 and we write it over 100. Okay, that's because 100 is 100%. So we started with 37.5%. Well, then we would have to write the 37.5 over 100. There's only 100% available, so we write the 37.5 over it, right? So then, as you can see here, we dropped the percent sign here, right? Because we're trying to convert a percentage, right? We're trying to convert this percentage into a common fraction. So write the 37.5 over 100 and drop the percentage. Okay, and what we want to do then is we want to take this decimal, we want to get rid of it. right? We want to get rid of this decimal here. So what we do is we move it to the right, right? And by moving it to the right, we now get 375 over 1,000. So you may say, well, how do we know if we go to the right, we go to the left? So think about what we're doing here. Okay, we're taking a percentage. You can think about it, oh man, I got 37% on my assignment. It's 37% of 100, right? That's what you got, 37.5% of 100%. Well, if you want to know what the fractional equivalent, the common fraction equivalent here is, then get rid of the percent sign, write your 37.5 over 100. And now I got to get rid of the decimal, because by moving the decimal this way, I just increase the number of decimal places. By moving it to the right, I get rid of my decimal. And that's what we did here, right? So we move the decimal to the right on the numerator, and there's a decimal here after a whole number, always is, right? So we move it to the right on the denominator, and we end up with 375 over 1,000. So that gives us, in lowest terms, right? This is the common fraction. Okay, 375 over 1,000. But that would never be our answer. We always want to reduce to lowest terms. So 375 divided by 1,000 is going to be 3/8, right? Or 375 over 1,000 reduced is 3/8. What about a mixed number? So if we have a number like this one here, 2 7/8, how would we ever figure out what the percentage is? So what I want you to think about for a second here is we learned that 1, the number 1, right? That's the whole amount, right? But here we have a 2 7/8. So 7/8 is the decimal portion, right? So 7 of 8 available pieces. But now we're saying we have 2 whole pieces and 7 of 8 available pieces. So how do we turn this into a fraction? Well, into a percent. The first thing we have to do, guys, is we've got to turn this into a decimal fraction. Okay, that's the first step. So we write down the number 2, and then we divide 7 by 8. So 7 divided by 8 is 0.875. Okay, so that's the first step. So what we learned from our last slide is that to get a percentage, we need to move the decimal 2 places. So there's moving it 1 place to the right. We move it to the second place to the right. And now we have a number 287.5. Well, 287.5 what? Right? It's actually 287.5%. Okay, so, and this makes sense, because if we look up here at the fraction, if this were just a 1, I said I have 1 of 1 pieces. How much do I have? Well, I have 100%, right? If I have 2 of 2 pieces, I have 200%. But then I have a fractional amount, right? I have 7 of 8 pieces. So that's this piece here, right? That's the 87.5%. So if there was no whole number here, this was just a fraction, 7/8, my percentage would be 87.5%. But since we have a whole number, and it doesn't matter what the whole number is, guys, whatever this whole number is, that's hundreds of percent, right? So it's 287.5%, okay? So what about if we had a fractional percent, right? How do we express this as a decimal fraction, right? So the first thing that we have to do is we have to convert the common fraction into a decimal fraction, right? So now we take the 7 divided by 16 and we get 0.4375%. Okay, so if I just wanted percentage, I know that this is 43.75%, right? Because I would have to move the decimal back the other way, right, to figure out. But we know that if 0.1 is 10%, we know that 0.4 is 40%, then we know this is 43% or 43.75. So this is why, anytime there's any more than 2 decimals when it comes to percent, right? Anytime there's more than two decimals. Whatever's the third decimal, right? So it'd be 43.75%. But what we normally do is we don't usually give decimal percentages. So we would take this number, this 7, and it tells us what to do with the 3, right? We round it to the full percent. So we would actually make this 44% if we were solving it. But we're not doing that right now, right? We're trying to take a fractional percent. We're trying to turn it into a decimal. So again, all we do is we divide the 7 by 16. We move the decimal 2 places to the left, not the right, because remember, we're converting to a decimal fraction, not to a percent. We're already in a percent right here. We want to convert it to a decimal fraction, so we have to go the other way. So we move the decimal from this position, right, which is here, 1 space. It was here, so 1 space, 2 spaces, and we drop the percentage sign. So 7/16% is equal to 0.004 as a decimal fraction. Let's turn the fraction 3 2/3 into a decimal first, okay? So we turn the 3 2/3 into 3.667, right? So remember, the 3 gets written, it's not a fraction, it's a whole number, so there's a decimal beside it right here. So 3 point, and then 2 divided by 3 is 667, okay? Rounded. This is 6 infinity, but we'll round it 3 decimals. So next, if we drop the percentage sign, and then take the decimal and move it 1 place, and move it a 2nd place, the number we end up here with is 0.037. 0.037 is the decimal fraction equivalent of 3 2/3%. Now, think about this. If remember what we said about percentage, very first thing we said about percentage, that if we take, remember that big square and we divide it into 100 pieces, the big square is equal to 1, right? We divide it into 100 pieces, so we do 1 divided by 100, we end up with 0.01. 0.01 is 1%, right? Well, if we look here, this is a 3, right? This is 3%, 3 2/3%. So if 0.01 is 1%, then 0.03 has to be 3%, right? And this is the remainder. So this is the decimal equivalent of 3 2/3%.